you so much, everyone, for joining us today in our inaugural event of the Bridge to Action series. I am Mamta Pimoli, Associate Director at Good Business Lab, or GBL. For those of you who are unfamiliar with GBL, we are a labor and research organization working towards demonstrating the business case for greater worker well-being. We always aspired to create impact beyond just creating evidence. And to realize that vision, we set up a small team back in 2021, which has grown to 18 people today and is called GBL Ventures. This team, which is still a part of GBL, is responsible for scaling our evidence-based digital solutions that aim to improve worker well-being and business outcomes. Bridge to Action series is an effort in this direction, and we are thrilled to have you all join us today. In this series, we will be speaking with industry reps to understand the core challenges faced by varied stakeholders in industries employing blue-collar workforce directly or indirectly via their supply chains. Through these conversations, we have diverse goals. As a service provider in this space, we want to be aware of the challenges faced so that we can serve our clients better. Moreover, we want to hear from everyone who creates the supply chain ecosystem to understand how we can best come together to tackle collective challenges. For one thing, we've learned from our experience that multi-stakeholder action is one of the most effective ways to create change. Now, presenting today's event, Decoding Labor Challenges in an Evolving Global Supply Chain, where we will be taking a deep dive into understanding what are some of the most pressing labor challenges that manufacturers face today, whether that is high attrition or low productivity, alongside understanding potential causes and discussing what can be done to mitigate some of these concerns. Joining us today are our industry leaders who know the ins and outs of the manufacturing space across various industries. First up, we have retired Major General Ramakrishnan, who is the VP of People Management at Texport Industries, one of India's notable manufacturers and exporters of woven and knitted apparel. Today, he will be drawing from his experience in leading the HR efforts of a company as large as Texport and directly overseeing thousands of workers. Next, we have Mr. Kanishk Negi, who is the Sustainable Procurement Director at Schneider Electric, where he is responsible for coordinating the procurement strategy by working with scores of suppliers across different regions, ranging from SMEs to giants such as ArcelorMittal. He will be highlighting the various complex challenges he has seen businesses and workers face, while also sharing solutions that Schneider Electric has helped facilitate and have proven to be effective. Finally, Mr. Nagarajan Chandru is the head of sales, marketing, and growth of the solar division at AMS Technologies, one of the leading manufacturing service providers. He specializes in sales, procurement, and supply chain management in renewable energy manufacturing and closely works with businesses in India and China. Through the discourse today, Mr. Nagarajan will be sharing with us if and how labor challenges have evolved over the years, especially in fields requiring a certain level of technical training. He will also be highlighting the effects of factors such as digitalization, the rise of gig economy, and foreign competition. Before we begin the conversation, we have a quick poll for our audience, so it'd be great if everyone could answer this quickly. We'll be sharing the results later. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Please keep answering the poll if you haven't. Let's start with the questions. We have quite a ground to cover today. So I'm going to start a question for everybody on this panel today. And we'll take turns talking about it. My first question for you all today is, what are some of the most pressing labor challenges But most importantly, how did you identify and learn more about these challenges and their causes? And this is pertaining to the industry and the sector you are in. We can get started with Mr. Ramakrishnan. If you could go first.
Good evening to all, and thank you, Great Business, a Good Business Lab, for inviting me as the member on your program, Bridge to Action, and extremely happy to participate as a humble member amongst other luminaries from the industry. Texport Industries looks at human resource not merely as a resource, but we believe in our workforce as human beings, as the management has to win their hearts and mind and manage this workforce. Therefore, you would have noticed that we have rechristened it as people management. We take it as our duty of care to provide and maintain safe physical work environment, including physical and emotional well-being. We in Texport also believe that as an industry, we need to ensure appropriate industry standards and statutory safety regulations. We also need to ensure that people work a reasonable number of hours and have adequate rest breaks. Towards this, we do conduct work-based risk assessment, which will lead to protecting people from discrimination, bullying, and harassment, etc. We essentially believe that to achieve this, we need to provide the individual with clear job description detailing with their work limits and the limits of their role. Of course, if this is what we are looking at, and then essentially we need to provide necessary training and widen their skill set at all fronts. To sum it up, we need to provide our team members with opportunities to raise concern and offer feedback. And in an industry like ours, challenges are very many, and I can't specifically home on to any one of it right now, be it the issue of attrition or absenteeism or issues at workplace. You're aware that our industry is women-dominated at the worker level. Therefore, very important on our part to understand the sensitivities connected to their living conditions, cultural ethos, and the family compulsions. I will leave it here and possibly dwell on these aspects as we move on. Thank you.
Great. I will probably come back to you and ask about a little bit more about the risk assessment piece that you mentioned and how you do it at Texport briefly. I would now move to Mr. Negi. Kanishk, if you could answer this.
Thank you, Mamta. And I am part of the Global Procurement Organization. So in my day-to-day activities, I look at the extended enterprise or the extended arm of Schneider Electric, which is the supply base. And we work to make sure that the working conditions within our supply partners are also same as that we try to maintain within Schneider Electric. Now, Schneider Electric is a global corporation in the space of energy management, automation, and digitalization. And the company has a presence in over 100 countries, and which also results in our supply base being spread across different geographies, different countries. And that brings with it a very nuanced challenge of reflecting the socio-economic or the cultural realities of the society into the behavioral patterns or the ways of operations of our supply base. Now, one thing that we would clarify is there is no difference of any standards that need to be maintained when we are operating, when we are engaging with supply partners across different parts of the world. It doesn't matter what the realities of the region or the geography are. There are basic standards of operations which need to be adhered to when they are working as part of Schneider Electric's value chain. What we have seen as a more common observation in terms of the challenges when it comes is the respect to the local legal requirements in a very basic and essential form is definitely an area of improvement. Issues such as excessive overtime, wherein factories operate going beyond the number of prescribed hours for which is mandated by regulatory agencies. Areas such as the social security, which is extended, namely ESI and PF, not being extended, or if being extended, calculations not being done in a proper manner, which reduces the contributory amount from the organization. Workers at many times not being aware of what kind of reductions happen when they receive the wage slip or when they receive the monthly wages. Contract workers not being treated fairly, or let's say not given the due respect in terms of their job, in terms of the remuneration, in terms of the rights which are extended to the on-roll workers, and also low job security amongst the workers. And this has especially heightened if you look at the last couple of years, which were severely impacted by the COVID crisis and the aftermath of the resulting issues that came up. And these are the issues which I would say are at the heart of the engagement, at the heart of our relations with the suppliers. Most of the times, companies do not have any difficulty in agreeing to, let's say, requirements which are high level, but as they say, devil lies in the details. When you go to the specific requirements, when you start picking up these specific issues, that's where you find the gaps exist, and that's where, in fact, the behavioral side of it is also, brought to the front. In a lot of geographies, people know these are malpractices, but they simply accept it as a way of doing business in that particular region. So a major focus of our interaction with our supply partners is to make sure that these ground level nuances, these ground level realities are identified, rectified, and it doesn't just rest on our part to indicate and say that this needs to be rectified. In most of the cases, our teams work with our supply partners to find out a practical resolution of these challenges, because many times these are so operationally chronic issues that even if a company wants to address it, they often find it difficult in how do they resolve these challenges. Now, why do we look at these? I mean, apart from the fact that it is morally and ethically incorrect to engage by in any kind of business relation where exploitation is happening, there are other elements as well. I mean, it exposes, or these kinds of malpractices expose the customer organization to a variety of risks, ranging from sudden disruption to any incident or malpractice, which may even have a huge reputational impact on the organization. It also impacts the growth plans of the company within a specific geography. Now, the growth plan relies to a large extent on the quality of supply base and how resilient, how reliant our supply partners are. Now, if we, let's say in the assessment, realize that large chunk of our supply partners are probably not going to be meeting these requirements, it does put a big question mark on the reliance that we are going to put on those partners for the growth of the company. So these issues are not merely, I would say, labor issues or classified as worker-related issues. They have a very strong influence on the growth plans of the company in a particular geography. I would hand it over back to you, Mamta.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really like that. In fact, I like that you emphasize that you work with the actors in the entire supply chain to resolve these issues. A lot of times, I think we hear, wouldn't it be better to not have such actors in our supply chain? But for at least we know that that's not the right approach. You end up making a vulnerable population even more worse off if you take away those opportunities from that particular, in that particular geography. Great. I love that. Now, Mr. Chandru, would you like to please answer this question?
Good evening to everybody, or morning, based on which part of the world you're joining us today. It's great to be on this panel to discuss such an important issue that all of us, have been thinking about at some point during our work career. To specifically dive into your question, Mamta, I would say that, primarily from my interaction uh, with companies and manufacturing units in India, we see that the main problem that we are somewhat identifying is the absolute lack of skill or skill mismatch that exists in the workforce, right? So solar panel manufacturing is something that is not considered a high tech industry. Like, we don't actually need a hugely skilled workforce, but even for an industry that has a very basic or a low bar of entry, we are still finding it extremely difficult to find qualified workforce who can start work even with some amount of basic training that these companies are willing to give them, right? So oftentimes we are facing this issue where our customers and our companies have to start at a negative level, and then we have to bring them up to a certain level, and then we impart the specific training that you need to work in these lines. And this seems to be a challenge that exists across the country. It is not state specific or region specific, is what we've primarily seen. And more taking it forward, another issue that plagues our industry very specifically is the opposite of what Major was talking about, right? Our industry sees an abysmally low amount of participation from women. Our factories are still primarily dominated by men, and that also makes it extremely difficult to also extremely challenging, I would say, to bring in gender disparity, because you have to start at a stage where women would be comfortable to work in a place that's dominated by men, right? And we are talking about blue collar jobs. These are not cushy factory AC office cabin jobs. So we need to be able to find ways to provide safe spaces for women to feel comfortable to working for working in these areas. And that is something that we've seen that's extremely difficult, but this is something that is doable, right? So the other area of my expertise lies in dealing with factories across Southeast Asia and China, where we see there is an overwhelming participation of women. Like, gender disparity does not seem to be a problem in these markets. It is something that we've observed that exists only in India. Uh, why is, again, your guess is as good as mine. So, but that is something that we cannot neglect and just say that this problem exists and let's just move ahead. So we are working with our partners and our customers constantly to try and see how it is that we can try and solve this. And this is a problem that's being taken seriously. They're not taking it easy, saying, we are still getting people. Why do we bother? So that's a heartening fact that we are noticing. But largely, to tie these 2 points together, another major problem that I'm sure is not just an issue with the manufacturing in our field, but manufacturing in general, is the informal sector domination, right? So we don't see these blue collar workers being, full-time workers of these companies. We still look at them. I mean, they are still being treated as contract workers that can be hired or fired at will. So there is very little incentive from these workers to sort of stay invested in the company, which is also leading to high attrition. And there is also no incentive from the company's side to invest in these workers and increase their wages and allow them to stay put in this company, because they always treat them as a replaceable resource, wherein they're not, right? So I think these are some primary challenges that we are facing, and also this comes with a caveat, right? So manufacturing is not old to India, but solar panel manufacturing is still quite new compared to other sectors. So this is something that industries and companies and company leaders are still trying to grapple with to see how they can best address. Yeah, I'll hand it back to you if you have any further questions. Yes.
That's very insightful. I just have a follow-up here about the, not finding qualified workers and investing a lot in training, etc. It's a huge cost, right? And if I'm surprised to hear, even after investing so much money, they are not incentivized enough to keep that workforce. I think that's really economical if you think about it. And in terms of just the qualification, what is, if you had to summarize, what is lacking? Is it like literacy levels, or is it just the technical qualifications? But is there a general way you would define it, or is it
Yeah.
like not something you can define?
Yeah. So, I mean, are you done? I'm so sorry. Can I?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So in most cases, we see that it's a mix of these, right? So there is no one standard, like a standout quality that is sort of affecting this. In some cases, we see that it's a literacy issue, which is when they have to sort of bring them up to speed to a basic level of literacy so that training can be imparted. But in most cases, what ends up happening is, uh, like I told you, so we as an industry are heavily dependent on China for technological advancements, and we take the foreman of these factories or forewomen of these factories sort of take training. They travel to China, get trained, and then they come back, and then they are the most valuable people in a factory, right? So these are often the workers that are poached by newer factories that are coming in because they can already start at that level, and these people in turn sort of impart training to the line workers and the maintenance workers and etc. etc. So it is at this level that we're seeing some sort of a lack of skilled worker availability. Because I think at the foreman level, they still have some sort of basic qualification in terms of education to operate at this level, right? To specifically answer your question, I think it's a mix of literacy issues. It's a mix of being aware of how to operate a machine, and also the willingness to even learn, right? Because even if we've also seen that because there's very little that's tying them down to the job, they always look at themselves also as someone who can be fired at any minute. So the workers don't have that sort of a drive to stay committed and learn the skill and take it to the next level, right? So that is a major point of challenge that we have. Yes.
I see. All right, that's very insightful. Okay,
Yeah.
moving on, and Mr. Negi, I have a question for you. There are so many challenges we talked about, but I also know that some of these challenges are further compounded by external factors such as like regulation, power dynamic, cultural context, as you mentioned yourself. So my question to you, what is the role that changing labor regulation has played, and has it further complicated the existing labor challenges, or has it alleviated some of the pain points?
I think the evolving regulatory scenario has been extremely helpful in putting the topic into the focus. In the past couple of years, we have had, if not less, at least 15 regulations which have come from different parts of the world focusing on this particular topic. Regulations such as Modern Slavery Act in the UK and Australia, the French Duty of Vigilance Act, the Norwegian Transparency Law, the US Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We had the regulation piece which empowered the US Customs and Border Agency to confiscate any goods that are suspected to have benefited from forced labor or modern slavery. We even had the recent German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which increased the penalty to the companies up to a tune of 2% of their turnover in cases of benefit from slavery or forced labor. We also had the very recently adopted European Regulation for Sustainability Reporting, which has got a specific dedicated chapter on how companies are engaging with the workers in their value chain. So I guess, and then there is another, long list of regulations which are pipeline, which are bound to come. Now, if you look at all these diverse legislations that have come over the past years and are going to come in the future, there are two common threads that we observe. The first one is it makes it mandatory for the companies who are operating global supply chains to do a due diligence of their supply base. Now, it doesn't matter whether I have a presence or my company has a presence in the geography where the supplier is located or not. I have to be accountable for the behaviors, actions, and the way workers are treated by my supplier, irrespective of the geography where they are operated. So that requirement of due diligence is one common thread across all the regulations. And the second one is it's not just the due diligence that I have to do. I have to identify the hotspots, rectify them, and also communicate in a public manner on the actions that have been undertaken by the company to remediate these challenges. And these disclosures, as they are public, they are open for public scrutiny. They are open for scrutiny from civil society organizations or even regulatory agencies. And in many cases, these disclosures are picked up by, let's say, different set of stakeholders, and the companies are challenged on the areas where there are no demonstrable performances. So I would say that the recent spate of legislations, they have played a great role in bringing the issue of human rights within the global supply chain firmly back into the discussion table. What we also see is, along with the regulations, it's the entire ecosystem which is evolving. So earlier, what used to happen, if there was a malpractice which was happening at a supplier premises, it used to be usually a local affair. And usually in the countries where the supply base is concentrated, it typically used to suffer from, let's say, low enforcement of the regulations, or the regulations were simply not that strong enough that workers could get any remediation or redressal even if they approach the courts of law or the regulatory. Now we have instances where not only the supplier but even the customers are being taken to courts, and not only in the country of where the supplier is located, but in the country where they are domiciled. And these are typically mature economies with much stronger rules and regulations, with a very strong sense of enforcement of these rules and regulations. And workers are now challenging and taking the customers to the court of law, making them accountable for the malpractices that are happening in the supplier premises, in the supplier country, which is a different set of location.
Yeah.
And this reinforces the fact that there is no longer any insulation between what's happening in another geography, another entity, and the owners. It brings back the fact that a company is mandated to have an oversight on the actions of its suppliers. And if there is a malpractice happening, it's fairly and squarely the responsibility of the customer to make sure it's identified, rectified, else they have to bear the consequences. And the example, one of the most recent examples was of a customer electronics goods company. One of their suppliers forced workers to work in a particular factory. They were migrant workers. Somehow they escaped, they went back to their home country, and they were able to successfully launch a case in the courts and now they've taken successfully onto this big corporation. So I would say it's a very welcome move that the rules are becoming much more clearer, much more accountable when it comes to the responsibility that customers or corporations have towards the supply chain.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I want to just talk about 2 points here. One is, as you said, sometimes the challenges are so mired in the culture and the just the behavior that's prevalent in that particular geography. I think it would be a challenge to also understand how these regulations can be adapted to different geographies as well, because I think it would need not every solution might work in every place, so it would also need a lot of creativity in that sense. But another point I wanted to sort of emphasize, and this comes from from a GBL perspective, because we work a lot with we want to emphasize that we work a lot with the suppliers as well, and we not just we work with both. Like we were trying to give solutions to brands that they can provide to their supply chain, but we also want to work directly with the suppliers to empower them and make their voices heard as well in that brand supplier relationship. And I think that's a nice segue for me to ask Mr. Ramakrishnan the question that I wanted to. Mr. Ramakrishnan, within the first answer, you sort of mentioned, you do risk assessments. I wanted to come back to that, but I'm not sure if we'll have enough time. So I want to ask you the other question that I wanted to ask. What role does the brand supplier dynamic play in people management? And how do you navigate the complexities that come with it? Because I know it is a complex relationship. And if you want to answer the first one as well, where you talked about you do risk assessments. So I would like to understand what has been the best way to do such risk assessments. But it's up to you.
I couldn't capture the full question, Mamta. I'm sorry, because there was a technical gap. But what I could capture before the connection went bad.
The question.
Oh.
I think we're losing you a little. Yeah. Oh, you're
do you hear me?
I take it on, Mamta?
Yes, please. Thank
you. Thank you. I'll first let me get on to this brand supplier dynamic play. Garment industry in India especially, and it commenced very rudimentary a few decades back, and we have slowly now improved in all facets of manufacturing, from the way we look at machines, from the way we look at the workers. So we at Texport always have been at a lookout for a win-win relationship with our buyers. Right, the cornerstone of our business philosophy is always to achieve a leadership position in every facet of our business, while maintaining the highest standards of excellence and integrity. That is what our key facet of our manufacturing is. The conduct of our business with our associates, customers, consumers, suppliers, and all others needs to be fair and honest. We are aware of the buyer's compulsions as regards to their compliance principle requirements. And this is where that brand supplier dynamic play comes in. We strictly abide by their requirements by fine-tuning our assets in the terms of the men and the machinery. In the same breath, I would also like to emphasize that we strictly adhere to the Indian labor laws in order to follow the compliance principles in letter and spirit. We carry out regular systemic check by, as I mentioned earlier, by identifying risks, analyzing the risks, taking appropriate action to mitigate those risks, which is followed by checking the effectiveness of the actions initiated so as to establish a complaint mechanism to have a more transparent and public reporting process. So you see, it is well encompassed, and it meets the requirement both of the manufacturer as also the buyer. So now that fine tuning is required, and we are all out in doing the same thing in all ways which benefits both. Towards this, each factory has evolved a mechanism in the form of various committees. Like most of you must be aware, or people in the industry are aware, that most of the factories have committees like Works Committee, Canteen Committee, Employees Health and Safety Committee, Grievance Redressal Committee, and the most important, because as I mentioned earlier, that our workforce have a maximum of women participating, we have the POSH Committee, which is the Prevention of Sexual Harassment. These committees meet regularly and update the management on the conduct and issues, if any, which requires our attention. Therefore, as you have noticed, that the people management activities are well addressed in all its facets from the buyer's perspective, and constant mutual interaction helps us to refine this system. And if that the need arises, we do refine and re-refine in case we require. You are aware that it is a continuous refinement process, and we are always open to change. So this is how, if I specifically answer your question on the brand supplier dynamic, how do we I've tried to cover it in the best possible time, but then I don't have the time to cover all the aspects, but then the most important aspects I have put across to you. Mamta?
Mamta, you're on mute.
I shouldn't be doing that. Moving on. Thank you so much. That's great.
Mamta, can I just add one point?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. To the previous question, because there was a bad connection, I couldn't hear the concluding question, but I could capture the first part of it, and where you were mentioning that is there a need, owing to the differences in different geographies, practices, etc., to adapt these laws which are coming in to suit them better? I would say certainly not. We need to have a uniform set of regulations, and what is needed is to make sure that the practices that we have, which are not according to the specific requirements, need to be updated. I mean, case and example could be excessive overtime. Now, in India and as well as other emerging economies, we know overtime and excessive of it is a very oft-quoted challenge. Now, when we look at the regulations, it doesn't mean that we should tweak the global regulations to adapt to the excessive timing. Rather, and in fact, that is what we do, and that's what I meant when I said we need to work with our partners, is we sit with them to figure out how they can overcome these chronic challenges which are operational in nature, which are stemming from the way practices have been in a particular geography. It is a long process, it is a tedious process, it requires behavioral change, acknowledging that practices that were being implemented, they are definitely not in alignment with the law of the land as well as the global expectations. So
yeah, no, I get it. I didn't mean that we tweak the regulation.
We need to partners to overcome and find solutions.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, you went in and out. No, I didn't mean how we tweak the regulation. I meant helping suppliers meet the regulation. There might be different approaches taken by different suppliers based on the cultural, etc. That's what I meant. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Mr. Chandru, I want to ask you, we talked about a lot of challenges, especially pertaining to the industry you are in. A lot of, I know you're doing a lot of, the industry itself is trying to do a lot of things to overcome these challenges, but just sort of taking a little bit farther view, 5 years from now, what do you see as like the challenges that still maybe today you can see that they aren't being given enough either attention or there's not enough solutions in place, and 5 years from now those challenges would remain unresolved if we fail to address them today, or at least think about them, and they might be very critical to the business?
So I would like to give a slightly optimistic tune to your question, right? I would try and think about how we could probably, or rather what we're doing right now, which would probably make these challenges obsolete 5 years down the line. Because I think that'll be a little bit more something that we can look forward to, right? So firstly, like I told you, for the skill mismatch aspect, right? So especially in India, we are giving a huge impetus because of low prices for mobile data, online availability of courses, and in general, upskilling avenues are right now a lot more compared to what it was earlier, right? And with greater penetration of smartphones in rural areas, in absolute rural areas, I am hopeful, or let's say it is my dream that we reach a point where a skilled availability of a skilled workforce is not a distant dream. By skill, I don't mean specific sector skills, right? So even basic things like I told you about challenges with respect to literacy, or even the avenue to sort of know what the basics are to work in a blue collar job, and just things like that, right? So which I feel will sort of also, this also has a potential impact of drawing a lot more people into the workforce, because I believe this sort of an exposure will allow a lot more young workers to come out of agriculture and look for better jobs elsewhere, right? And the way in which India is progressing with respect to opening of more and more factories, we do need a lot more labor than what we have right now, and we have to draw it from agriculture the way it stands today. So this is where I believe digitization of the country, in a sense, will sort of hold us or put us in a better spot 5 years down the line than we are today. Or At least that's the hope. And secondly, with respect to another aspect that I feel definitely uh, might might not be as refined or reformed as it is compared to where we are today is the informalization of the workforce. I don't see enough of an attention that's being given or enough of an impetus that's being given. We are moving more and more towards a gig economy concept as a country, right? So we are not looking at formalization of the workforce. We don't want, or rather, we are not looking at things that will bring a lot more people into the formal economy with respect to blue collar jobs and people who work for a daily labor basis, right? So this is something that I would really hope we as a country or institutions involved, be it private or public, at least start talking about how we can do this so that because it's very important for these workers to sort of be a part of the mainstream so that they can have greater bargaining power. Yeah.
We do tend to skip that step even in the past. That's true.
Yeah.
Understand. Okay. Well, now that we have heard from our panel some of the most pressing concerns for manufacturers today, we'd also like to quickly hear from our participants, because joining us in the audience, we have brands, suppliers, manufacturers, and civil society organizations who have their own first-hand experiences and insights that are equally important. So please go ahead and, we're going to release another quick poll. Please go ahead and answer that. Moving on, I want to directly jump to the question because we have only 15 more minutes remaining. So my question for everyone today is, my last question for everyone today is, what are some of the most effective solutions you have seen that have been used to tackle the challenges discussed today? And Mr. Chandru, you've already kind of answered that. So if you have anything else to add, we can go to you. Otherwise, we can go to other panelists.
So I just like to quickly add on another thing that we've seen work very well, right? So we've sort of seen this small pilot in one particular company. I don't want to name them, but they have sort of two plants in two different districts in the same state. In one district, they've sort of taken, which was their earlier older plant. They're still operating here by hiring labor on a contract basis through contract agencies. But in the second plant, they've sort of moved some of their initial worker from this plant, and they've decided to hire workers directly in their company role. And it's been about 2 years, and we've seen that retention is a lot higher. Output is a lot better because workers are contributing better, they're upskilling themselves. So that sort of is very, very heartening to see, because we just assume that this is the answer to solve this, but it's also nice when it actually plays out that way. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to share. Yes.
No, that's wonderful. That's a good story. Mr. Negi, I know you spoke about how regulations have really brought all these issues to the fore and are really driving the change. Is there anything else you'd like to add on what are other effective solutions to the challenge?
No, definitely. I think one of the key elements is involvement of the procurement organization. And I'm talking from a supply chain perspective. If we have to have seriousness with our supply partners on these issues, we need to have the buyers, we need to have the procurement members on the discussion table. Otherwise, it's just not going to make dent. That's the first part of it. Equally important, because procurement guys can bring in the seriousness into the discussion. But to resolve some of these chronic challenges, it would need an innovative solution. It would need a relook of the way things have been done in the past. And that's where we need to keep our minds open, try and innovate to figure out different ways of doing things. An example would be, and I'll refer back to the excessive overtime issue. Traditionally, the overtime is being looked upon as a labor problem or a human resource problem. Now, we found a huge deal of success with quantified, measurable improvements when we change the lens of looking at excessive overtime from a labor or an HR issue to a production planning issue. And we could identify a long list of actions that could be implemented by our partners to successfully limit the working hours, at the same time increasing their product, relooking and innovating and experimenting to resolve the chronic challenges, simplifying and demystifying the requirements, because a lot of times the knowledge is the gap. Companies don't even know what requirements have to be followed. So knowledge sharing, capacity building, I think these are some of the critical elements to change the way how worker rights or human rights in general are being looked at in the supply chain. And it's not just good enough to look at these issues and take an arm's length approach and say, okay, this is the requirement, we want you to do this, and then leave the partners or suppliers to figure out how. That's never going to work. You need to be with them in their shop floor, along with them, sitting and trying to figure out how things could be changed, how things could be worked out, how the bottlenecks can be resolved, and that's what will give you results. So being there, embedded into the trenches with the suppliers, is what's going to help. Thank you, Mamta. Back to you.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I especially like that you emphasized a lot of these issues that we see getting clubbed as all labor issues might just be, they're sometimes, maybe a lot of times they're rooted in like maybe poor planning, poor production planning, poor requirement gap, etc. So that's extremely useful. My question now to Mr. Ramakrishnan, I know just having a supplier's view on this table, have there been any specific solutions that Texport has employed to tackle labor challenges, and which ones have yielded greatest benefit?
Yeah, thank you, Mamta. Now, before I take on that, I would, since we were discussing about production planning, I think Mr. Negi is right. Most of our challenges can always, especially from the point of view of attrition and issues of the workers on the floor, a lot of commitment by the production team does help in resolving the issues which emerge from the workers' point of view. Now, I will just add, before I address to that your question specifically, that you see, from the garment industry point of view, and since we have a majority of women participating as our workforce, we have to actually navigate a lot of cultural norms. And we feel that the solution remains in how we as a manufacturer deal with it to maintain a very cozy and constructive relationship with our workforce. Now, it has the minimum impact on buyer relations and compliances, however. With the prevailing cultural diversity in our country, and which our nation is very proud of, it is natural that, even local festivals, including village festivals, priority of family commitment, sickness of the dear and dear ones, they all include, and anything in the extended family takes a front seat for our worker. These are avenues of absenteeism, which does have a fallout on productivity, and therefore can be fine-tuned by a nice balancing act between the challenge to be met by the production requirement vis-a-vis the non-negotiable or so-called non-negotiable family commitment of our workforce, which we respect, and therefore we get into a solution which is mutually accepted. So I just thought I should mention this. Workforce, what we deal with, and we have found great success in taking a approach where our sector has been facing the issue of attrition, which of course does lead to low productivity. We at Texport have taken this issue very seriously and are overcoming this issue in the rise of attrition by various means. And if you very specifically want me to point out, Texport management has a vast experience in this field, known from the expectations of these employees and from which they expect from the organization. We ensure that our workers have not been discriminated at any point, like remuneration, promotion, rewards, since we are aware that these factors will motivate and empower employees to work towards the organizational growth and development. In addition, we also have these welfare measures, which like any other industry provision, like food, transport, medical, and other welfare facilities. Just to mention that working towards the retention of employees, Texport is concerned about their career growth and development, ensuring that we need to provide welfare measures, safety measures, salary increments, rewards, and apt recognition. In addition, we give employees going through life events the ability to balance work and home life. We as an organization walk an extra mile in meeting individual needs, workers, co-workers relationship, boost worker satisfaction, and special care during onboarding and orientation, wherein every new hire is set up for success from the very start. We at Texport have initiated something called Vishwasa. If you want to know about it, this is something which literally transports to belief, by amalgamating our own majority women representatives from different levels from our head office, where the Vishwasa team members visit our factories every week without fail, with an aim to meet their objectives. And if you ask me what are their objectives, it is basically creating awareness in all the benefits and facilities provided by the company, sensitizing our workforce, supervisory staff and managers, and creating gender equality, mainly generating confidence amongst the workforce. The Vishwasa team forms a helping hand in improving physical, mental, moral, emotional well-being of an individual, and thus create a safe and enjoyable work environment. And we also have started something, choosing of buddies among our co-workers. Now, this helps us, and how we have formalized a very strict weekly monitoring and reporting procedure, whereas they report to us on the buddies appointed, awareness announcements, new challenges faced, voluntary helping hand requirements, counseling and training of buddies, etc., and feedback on the awareness program which has been held. Now, these actions do give us benefits. Well, it may not be changing the approach totally, but definitely preventive measures are applied. Managing a massive workforce distributed at various sites is a definite challenge. However, we need to be more alert and sensitive to the aspiration of our workers. That is what we very strongly feel. We have systems in place with our monitoring mechanism to understand the pulse of the individual at all times during factory working hours. We also have counselors who immediately address issues into the interpersonal relationship at home and also at workplace, ethical issues, and we do find remedies which are mutually acceptable for resolution. Well, I can go on and on, but we stand benefited immensely by these actions for sure. We can see the change in our absenteeism and attrition patterns, obviously, but there is still more to go. We keep analyzing data, and data therefore is the key. And that is what I can think pinpoint and mention here, because there are very many more. I think that would be at the cost of time. Thank you, Mamta.
Yeah, no, those are definitely some of them we've heard a lot also in just our experience, but those are great measures. I have a question for Mr. Chandru. What are some of the hurdles that you've encountered in persuading your suppliers or other players in the industry to adopt, just solutions that might alleviate the challenges that your industry faces?
Yes, primarily cost, right? So any of the challenges that we spoke about, to rectify them, even to start thinking about rectifying them comes at a cost to the company. And like I told you, my specific sector is at a very nascent stage, and it is highly cost competitive purely because we are competing with China, right? And when you're competing with a country like China, which is so far advanced in their manufacturing, there's very little you can do other than just say, I want to do it, but I can't afford to do it. But I mean, that's the ground reality. But we do see that companies are seeing the positive side of aspects like investing in their workforce, because like you said, they are beginning to realize that it's a lot more expensive to keep training if the churn ratio is very high, to keep training and to keep at it, and productivity takes a hit, and etc. So the main challenge with respect to my industry specifically is the cost that involves, the cost that comes and into ensuring. So just to give you a small example, right? I'll keep it very brief. So a large part of the supply chain for solar raw materials originates in a specific province in China, which is notorious for doing some things that are not very well accepted worldwide. And there is a uh, there is a rule that the US has passed, which says that if you want to supply solar panels to us, you have to you do not, I mean, you must not have procured raw material from this particular district. So you will have to provide traceability for us to ensure that there is no sort of labor exploitation that has happened, because Mr. Negi also mentioned that these laws exist which sort of ensure.
Yeah.
But the biggest challenge with respect to this is there is absolutely no way you can sort of make sure that you can trace it back to a satisfactory extent, right? Because the only thing that companies based out of US ask for is a government document which says, this particular raw material is originated in this district, and you will never ever convince China to say that it does not come from a specific district, because that is sort of asking them to that is sort of asking them to implicitly accept that there is some sort of an issue that's happening with them, right? So and that automatically means higher cost. So if you want a legitimately sourced product which is not from a specific district, that comes at a much higher cost, which people are not ready to bear. They don't want to pay for having better qualities and having better products in the market, right? So it is a challenge that not just we are not just facing with our manufacturers, but also with our customers. So there is an exercise that is ongoing right now in sort of educating the entire value chain of renewable energy into making them understand that in the long run you only have positives to look for a small cost that you face in the short term. So yeah, so to summarize, it's the money.
I mean, it's not unique to your industry, to be
Yeah.
honest. We are trying to scale up solutions that we have studied. Others have
Yeah.
also to show impact. They may not
Yeah.
be direct business costs on the face of it, but they have shown to have so much more impact in terms of ROI.
Wow,
But
that's wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, but that's not enough.
Yeah,
It's really
that's true.
not enough, is what we're learning, and
That's true.
it takes. Do you see a difference between smaller firms or bigger firms? Is the cost issue the same for both of them, or?
No, I mean, bigger firms luckily can sort of afford some sort of an increase in cost, because they do get better pricing because of their ability to purchase a lot more. So
Yeah.
they can still afford it. But uh, to give you context, the biggest manufacturer of solar panel in India is still not even cracking the top 10 in China, right? So we are still in a global scale, we are all just small firms trying to play with the
Yeah.
big guys. Yeah.
I
So
understand. Okay.
just to give you some sort of scale. But we are
No.
getting there. Like our industry has seen some great progress over the last year and a half, and we are projected to grow at a very good pace. So with scale, we are hoping that these sort of issues get addressed a lot more imminently than sort of think about it in the future, right? Because with scale
Yeah.
comes responsibility also. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love that. Okay, my last question for today is for Mr. Negi. We started with local context in the beginning, and I think I want to end there as well. Given that India is now a magnet for large multinational companies, how did Schneider Electric account for the local context when addressing these challenges and determining the right approach? Kanishk, can you hear me?
I think it's a combination. I can hear you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello?
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear you.
So I was saying that we have deployed a three-pronged approach, wherein at the basic level, we look at the law of the land and the compliance towards it. That's the basic hygiene factor that we need to look at. And if we have issues, if we have challenges, we work with the partners, we work with the suppliers to overcome those. That makes sure that even when we talk about the global requirements, the local legal requirements are firmly in the agenda and they are being met. Now, of course, we do find non-compliances and we broad categories, some things which are chronic operational issues, low-hanging issues which can be resolved with a little bit of capacity building and a push to the partner agencies, and legal compliances, which is where there is an absolute no-no. We cannot accept any of the deviations on those cases. So any non-compliance that we find typically falls in either of the three buckets, and then we have initiatives to address them. But going beyond the basics, we do not want our partners to remain focused only at the bare minimum. So we ask them to proactively take or adopt practices and standards which improve their sustainability profile when it comes to working conditions and human rights. We encourage them to adopt guidances like ISO 26000, which equip them in a gentle way on what kinds of policies, what kinds of processes they need to have. So it's a journey towards maturity that companies take. And then for the highest level of intervention, we have something which is called as the decent work program, where we go beyond the basic legal requirements or the prevalent normative practices, and we engage our partners who are much more, let's say, closer to our business relationship, much more strategic or preferred, and we work with them to implement aspirational issues such as living wages, such as employer pays principle, such as gender neutral workplace policies, so migrant workers, etc., etc. So there is a graded approach which is taken. It is driven by the extent and the collaboration and the future plans of the local entity with the business partners. And depending upon that, they are onboarded either on 1, 2, or all the 3 programs, and it gradually increases the overall coverage of the issues, while ensuring we have a completely robust and a compliant base to focus on. So that's how we address or balance the issue between the local as well as the global requirements, but it's never at the cost of it. The compliance or the adherence to the local legal requirements is definitely the foundation upon which everything is built.
Wonderful. Okay, I know we're over time by 5 minutes, so let's release our last poll for the audience, but I will now go ahead and close our discussion for today. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for taking out the time today, plus extra 5 minutes to talk to us. And yeah, it's great discussion. Everything we can discuss way more in detail, and we would love to continue our conversation beyond just this panel. But thank you so much to you and to our audience today for joining us for this first event. We will be continuing the series, and so keep an eye out for a word from us on that. And yeah, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mamta.
Thank you for organizing such a timely discussion. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.